Hi everyone, my name is Catherine, and today for this presentation I will be talking to you about the culture and personality theory. I want to go ahead and apologize right now for the glare I have on my glasses, but for the sake of me seeing, I'm going to have to keep them on. So, what I would like to start with is how we can kind of identify culture and personality as, two different terms individually. Culture definitely takes on a semiotic form. It can mean many different things to whoever it may be. And I think that's what is so beautiful about culture alone. Culture is definitely the idea of how we interact with one another and how we embrace life, whether it be through our entertainment, what we enjoy, how we choose to live spiritually, and how we choose to engage with one another. Um, my idea, and after this kind of investigation, I think that personality can very easily coexist with culture in the sense that personality is really how we behave in an environment. It's how we emotionally feel and think. It's really how our mind has developed its own way of operating throughout a day within a social instance, and how we choose to engage and perceive. So going from there, the history behind this theory looks as if it traces back as far as we've existed as is, and I only say that because I think that for us to advance as far as we have, there has always had to have been some sort of ticking or kind of just process of thought in some way for us to get to where we are. I definitely don't believe that any mind isn't capable of picking here and there. Um, so, what really, when it comes down to a timeline more so, is from the 18th century, this idea kind of started to expand a little bit more as we were able to observe one another as far as cultural differences go. And going into the 20th century, this became a lot more prominent as people were immersing themselves into one another's cultures more specifically. I think that the second that we were able to, have cross-cultural similarities and differences was when this idea of personality was really more so recognized and having ties to culture. So going from there, I think Franz Boas is kind of important to touch on, as he was one of the anthropologists of his time that documented what he was actually observing, and that was more so him being a part and utilizing and seeking out the differences between Western culture and a more primitive way of living. And by that, I don't necessarily like to use his term, but he kind of went about saying there's a savagery that was going on. I'm going to air quote that just for the sake of me not having said that. But what his main takeaway and what my main takeaway is, and I think for a lot of other anthropologists, is really the idea that as a society, we are capable of seeking out these differences between one another. And I think that when you start to divide the line between cultural norms, especially between a westernized culture, and in this time with Franz Boas, I would say that there is a foundation and a structured way of living that really came to be, whether it was through industrial formats or if it was through the way that we interact in gender roles. If you're a female or a male, and how you respond to society at that time, you were really given a set of rules. So this really changes his outlook and his perspective on how he viewed more native and tribal cultures at that time. So when he was able to investigate that, he was seeing such differences in the way that people operated, which wasn't in this kind of structured way of living that was developed at that time. So through that, I think that was really the foundation that was set up for Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, who are really the kind of powerhouse of this entire theory as anthropologists. Their primary research actually was a part in dealing with culture. They're culture anthropologists. I think they were able to really make that a career in their own, and for future anthropologists from there on out. And what they were able to take away from that in Franz Boas's ideas was that obviously two different cultures can easily have very, very, very different personality, whether that's from clashing differences and understanding that, or anything of the sort. So I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but there are, for the sake of my presentation, I'm going to focus on kind of one viewpoint, and in that being that personality and culture cannot be viewed separately. I think that these two are very cohesive terms, and they have a relationship with each other. They tend to exist in a way where I think if we are to view culture, we also have to consider personality and vice versa. Um, so I think to make sense of this within the research that I had done, I think that this is kind of a really it's a breakdown. It's an easy way of saying something, but it's as simple as saying that a baby is born without culture. Hence, more so, they're also not going to be born with a personality. Nobody has a baby that is coming out that has a set of foundations for culture awareness. And I think the way that we can connect that is because a newborn child also is without social interaction, and that's where that is kind of gained and learned through. This is a set of process that, when you are being raised, through those years, this is how you develop these kind of interactions socially, and how you choose to digest that and interact with your environment from there on. So let's see here. Personality is, I think it's become so closely related with culture, because personality can be defined as, I think it's a way of our thought process and how we choose to behave, together or alone. And I think it's a pattern of foundation and structure and how we want to project and perceive the world around us. So from here on, I think that it's most important to take the two terms and understand that the research that was done between culture and personality is really what I kind of focused on a lot, was the idea that these are two terms, while they can be malleable in their own way of definition, and how people choose to respond to them and define them can be so different from one another, they still are so intertwined. And I think that it's so important to engage in these kind of theories by relating yourself to them. And for me, I think the way that I made sense of this, through the readings, because none of these readings are simple. They're all rather difficult. And for us to understand it as students, at an undergrad level, I think it's important to kind of relate your own situation to another's. And, if we're all to think to ourselves right now in some sort of manner and be like, hey, do I think that my personality has been greatly affected by the culture that I'm a part of? I would easily say yes, absolutely. And what I chose to do was I wanted to make sense of this more. So an example is that I am very much so a part of an American family. I live in a westernized culture, and I have for a while. Aside from that, I also lived in Ghana and Turkey, two cultures which are vastly different from each other as it is. And that was something that kind of greatly influenced me on how I behave and how I interact now, and what has made me a rounded person. I can no longer say that I'm edged in my own way, because I definitely think I'm a sponge for learning more about other cultures at this point. And I think that kind of appropriation and outlook is very important in understanding that these theories, while maybe theories, are all completely understandable. And I think it's like an aha moment where you're like, yeah, totally. Culture and personality really do interact with one another, and I entirely believe that. For some of the last things that I would touch on is that Ruth Benedict, as an anthropologist, had kind of touched on the ideas of configurational approach with this theory, and I think that is important because it was really the basic foundation on how we are going to link meaning between our way of life and our perception and the way that we think as well. So, yeah, I mean, between this, really, it's just understanding that, you know, culture is very much so a part of the way that we are going to operate within society. And I think, I think that a lot of these things may never be answered in the way that we want because anything in anthropology can take on so many different terms and meanings and whatever anybody wants to see it as, because when it comes down to the human race, we are so easy to just kind of boom in all different directions. um, but I will say that I think the culture and personality theory is pretty spot on, and I think it's something that we should definitely all be open to and interested in. So, thanks for listening to me today. Thank you. Have a good day.